Before Lisbon became a postcard, before the trams, the crowds, the cameras, it was a city that breathed with the tide. Each dawn began with the slow shimmer of the Tagus River, when light spilled over its surface like molten gold. Sailors would rise to the smell of salt and smoke, fishermen to the creak of their wooden boats. The air was filled not with voices, but with rhythm, the quiet rhythm of a city that woke gently, as if afraid to disturb the light itself. They called it Olisipo once, the city of Ulysses, the legend said. Romans came, leaving behind their arches and baths. Then the Moors arrived, wrapping the hills in gardens, water channels, and songs. They called it Lisbon, the safe harbour. And when the sun fell, its 7 hills glowed like small lanterns above the sea. Long before tourists traced its narrow streets, Lisbon was already old, a city built from limestone and longing, where everything smelled faintly of salt and prayers. It was a city of shade and silence, of white walls that captured sunlight and gave it back softly, so that even at noon nothing seemed harsh. Here, light was not decoration. It was language. Beneath the stones, another city slept. Roman galleries carved into the bedrock, Moorish cisterns still echoing with water, tunnels that carried whispers instead of footsteps. The people above rarely spoke of them. They believed that beneath Lisbon lay its memory, a labyrinth that held both protection and warning. And perhaps they were right. For this city has always lived with 2 hearts, one above, one below. Above, the sound of bells, of waves against stone, of footsteps between blue-tiled houses. Below, a darker pulse, the drip of ancient water, the sigh of time trapped between walls. In the age before ships crossed oceans, Lisbon's world ended at its own horizon. Men looked at the river as if it were eternity itself. They sailed only far enough to return by dusk, their hands salted, their faces burned by wind, their faith tied to the rhythm of the tide. But then came the dream of the sea, a dream that turned small harbours into empires. From these quiet shores, ships began to vanish toward the edges of maps. Gold, spices, slaves, all would flow back through Lisbon's veins, and for a time the city shone brighter than any in Europe. Yet even in that brightness, the ground remembered. It held on to everything buried beneath, the bones of saints, the rubble of forgotten fortresses, and the tremor that one day would wake it all. On the morning of November 1st, 1755, the earth began to move. It was All Saints' Day. Candles burned inside churches. Choirs were singing when the walls began to crack. Within minutes, the heart of Lisbon collapsed, stone on stone, fire upon fire. The sea withdrew, then returned in a wall of water that erased everything the flames had spared. But the light came back. It always does. And when it returned, Lisbon rose again, slower, quieter, but not defeated. From ruin it drew order, from ash it shaped the city we walk today. Yet beneath the new facades, the old veins still pulse. The Roman tunnels, the Moorish wells, the silence that refused to drown. Stand now at the edge of the Tagus at sunrise. The gulls trace circles above the water. The tiles catch the morning in fragments of blue. If you listen long enough, you might hear the echo of that older Lisbon, the one before travellers, before trams, before noise, a city that once belonged to wind, stone, and prayer. A city that never stopped listening to what lay beneath. And tonight, as we walk through its story, from the light that shaped it to the darkness that almost erased it, remember this. Some cities are not remembered because of what they built, but because of what they refused to forget. Lisbon is one of them, the city beneath the light. Before Lisbon became a port of empire, it was a city of terraces and whispers. The Romans called it Olisipo, a name that carried the echo of an older world, one of sailors, merchants, and forgotten gods. They believed that Ulysses himself had founded it during his long voyage home, and though the legend is only a shadow on stone, the people here still speak of the hills as if they remember him. The hills were 7, rising like folded waves from the mouth of the Tagus River. São Jorge, São Vicente, Santana, Santo André, Chagas, Santa Catarina, and São Roque. From their summits, the land looked like a hand reaching into the water. Its fingers spread between light and mist. When dawn came, it came slowly, slipping through narrow streets and broken rooftops until the entire city glowed with a pale, amber breath. In the early centuries, Lisbon was a city that listened more than it spoke. The Romans built their forum where Baixa now stands, laying down streets in perfect geometry, aqueducts that drew water from distant springs, and baths carved into limestone, so pure that it shone like wet marble. Yet even then, the sea ruled everything. The Tagus was not merely a river, it was a mirror. Every decision, every ritual, every trade began with its tide. And every evening, when the sun fell behind the western ridge, the water reflected the colour of fire, not from torches, but from the warmth of the day itself, fading softly into the waves. Life here moved at the pace of the wind. Merchants hauled amphorae of oil, wine and fish sauce through the narrow Roman streets, while farmers led donkeys, heavy with citrus and olives, from the hills beyond. You could smell rosemary and salt in the air, and hear the echo of iron tools tapping against stone. The rhythm of a city still learning what it would become. Beneath their sandals, another sound whispered, the slow, steady drip of underground water. For beneath the city, the Romans had carved something remarkable, a labyrinth of galleries and arches, channels that carried water through the rock, cisterns that gathered the breath of the earth. Some say these tunnels were meant to supply the baths and fountains. Others believe they were sacred, built to keep the city cool and pure. Whatever their purpose, they survived everything: fire, war, even the earthquakes to come. When the Roman banners finally fell, silence returned. Centuries passed in the hush between empires. Then came the Moors. They did not conquer Lisbon with brutality, but with patience. They found a city sleeping in dust and light, and they taught it to breathe again. They named it Lisbona, and where the Romans had carved stone, the Moors carved air. They brought water back to life, guiding it through aqueducts that sang with every drop, coaxing gardens from dry terraces, filling courtyards with citrus and mint. The scent of orange blossoms became Lisbon's new perfume. The hills that once rang with Latin prayers now hummed with the call to prayer, soft and rhythmic, rising from towers that caught the morning sun. They built their homes not for glory, but for comfort. White walls, inner patios, narrow alleys that turned sunlight into a kind of mercy. The city's rhythm slowed. Time no longer marched, it drifted. In the evenings, when the air cooled, families gathered around wells and fountains, telling stories beneath olive trees, while the sound of water carried between them. This was Lisbon before conquest, before empire, a city that had learned to survive through balance, not ambition. The Tagus during this time was both boundary and promise ships came from North Africa, from the Mediterranean, carrying spices, silk, and whispers of distant faiths. Lisbon was neither entirely Moorish nor Christian. It was a mosaic of languages and customs, a meeting place at the edge of two worlds. On the hills above, vineyards grew beside mosques, and in the valleys below, artisans worked by lamplight, etching patterns into tiles that reflected both geometry and prayer. The first azulejos, those blue and white tiles that would later define Lisbon's face, were born here, inspired by Islamic art and carried by wind across centuries. At dawn, when mist hung low over the river, the city felt like a dream half remembered. Fishermen walked barefoot down to the shore, their nets slung over their shoulders, leaving shallow footprints in the sand that the tide soon erased. Women drew water from the fountains, balancing clay jars on their heads, their laughter mingling with the distant bleating of goats on the hillside. Children played among the ruins of old Roman walls, unaware that beneath them the earth was still breathing through hidden veins of stone and water. Lisbon's beauty has always come from this layering: Roman over Phoenician, Moorish over Roman, Christian over Moorish. It never erased what came before. It folded each memory into the next in time. These folds became invisible to the eye, but not to the soul. Walk through Alfama today, the oldest quarter, and you can still feel that mixture. The streets are so narrow that you can touch both walls at once. Cats sleep on doorsteps, warmed by the afternoon sun. The tiles shimmer like fragments of the sky, and from somewhere unseen music drifts, slow, melancholic, full of yearning. The Portuguese would later call it saudade, a longing for something that may never return. But the feeling itself is older than the word. It was born in these hills, long before anyone named it. The city's 7 hills made it both fortress and labyrinth. The higher you climbed, the quieter it became. From the top of São Jorge, you could see the entire river bend, the ships like silver insects crawling toward the sea. At night, the wind carried voices from one hill to another, prayers, songs, and sometimes cries. Fires flickered in courtyards, lanterns swayed on balconies. The city looked as though it were floating, each hill an island, each island reflecting the moon. Below in the dark, the tunnels kept their secret pulse. To live in ancient Lisbon was to live between light and shadow. People learned to build with both. They placed their windows to catch the morning, and their doors to hide from the afternoon. They painted their walls with lime to keep them cool, and hung curtains soaked in water to breathe through the heat. In winter, the wind came from the ocean, sharp and wet, and the city smelled of fish and smoke. Yet no one cursed it. The wind was part of life, like the tides. It reminded them they were never far from the sea. There were times when armies came, Visigoths, Crusaders, Christians from the north, but the city never truly lost itself. Each conqueror took what they needed and left behind what they couldn't understand. Even the Reconquista, when Lisbon was seized by Christian knights in 1147, changed the walls less than it changed the prayers. The mosques became churches. The gardens became cloisters. The wells were blessed instead of called to prayer, but the water still flowed, the tiles still shone, and the same hills still held their silence. After centuries of conflict, Lisbon stood again as a crossroads. No longer a Moorish jewel, not yet an empire, but something in between, a survivor. Its houses leaned on each other for balance. Its streets curled downward like roots toward the river. From above, the rooftops resembled waves frozen in motion. From below, the city seemed alive, breathing through every arch and tunnel. Travellers who arrived by sea often said that Lisbon shimmered. The limestone reflected sunlight so intensely that the entire harbour looked like it was made of gold. For sailors returning from long voyages, it was a beacon, the first glimpse of home. For strangers, it was a vision, a city that seemed to float between sky and water. But for those who lived there, the shimmer was something else. A reminder that beauty here was never permanent. Every reflection was temporary. Every stone could fall. Still, life continued. Bakers rose before dawn to light their ovens, the smell of bread mixing with the sea breeze bells from distant churches marked the hours, though few cared to count them. Time in Lisbon was circular. It moved like the tide. Fishermen returned as merchants departed. Markets opened, filled with olives, figs and salted cod. Children ran down stairways so steep they disappeared from sight, their laughter echoing off walls that had heard every language of the Mediterranean. And beneath it all, unseen but unforgotten, the underground city endured. The Roman galleries remained sealed beneath centuries of dust. The aqueducts still whispered, carrying water under the feet of people who no longer knew their names. Sometimes after heavy rain, a section of ground would collapse, revealing an archway, a chamber, a forgotten stairway leading into darkness. And for a brief moment, Lisbon remembered itself, the city below calling softly to the city above. To stand on these hills today is to stand on thousands of years of memory. Every layer hums with its own story. The stones of the Roman walls are cool and precise. The Moorish arches curve like the sound of a flute. The Christian towers point upward, as if in apology for all that lies beneath. Together they create something more than architecture. They create atmosphere, a harmony of ruin and rebirth that no modern skyline can imitate. This was Lisbon before empires and earthquakes, before explorers and tourists, before the age of maps, a city that grew like coral, quietly, patiently, building beauty upon loss, a city that carried its history not as weight but as breath. Every dawn it began again, washing itself in light. Every night it folded back into silence, letting the waves write its story anew. The city of 7 hills, not a symbol of conquest but of endurance, a place where every street bends toward the sea, and every breeze carries the memory of those who once listened here, to the wind, to the water, and to the slow, eternal pulse of stone. Every civilization begins beside water, but few ever learn to listen to it. Lisbon did. The Tagus was not merely a river, it was a presence. It carried not just trade and travel, but memory. Its tides rose and fell like breathing, and in that rhythm the city found its pulse. Before there were maps, before there were ships that crossed oceans, the people of Lisbon watched this water and learned from it. They saw how it could be patient, how it could be violent, how it could reflect both the sky above and the earth beneath. The Tagus taught them that beauty and danger often come from the same source. At dawn, it was silver, smooth as a mirror stretched between the hills. By noon, it turned blue, shimmering beneath the cries of gulls, and at dusk it glowed gold, carrying the reflection of the sun all the way to the Atlantic. There were nights when fog rose from it like smoke, softening the edges of the city, erasing the line between land and water. To live in Lisbon was to live in this in-between, half earth, half tide. Fishermen knew its moods, as others might know the turning of seasons. They could tell from the smell of the wind when rain was coming, when the current would rise, when the catch would vanish. Women along the banks washed linen in silence, their reflections rippling like ghosts beside them. Children chased the tide until their feet disappeared into the foam, laughing until the river swallowed their echoes. The Tagus was never only scenery, it was ancestor, witness and warning. Long before the empire, long before the earthquake, it had already seen countless worlds pass by. Phoenician merchants with amber and tin, Greek sailors steering by stars, Roman galleys carrying soldiers and gods, Moorish fleets crossing from the southern deserts. Each civilization added something to the water and took something away. The river accepted all of it, but forgot nothing. When the Romans left, their stones sank beneath silt and algae. When the Moors built their docks and channels, they reused those same stones, never knowing who had cut them first. Even centuries later, when Christian kings rebuilt the harbour, the workers would sometimes find fragments of marble carved with Latin words, or shards of pottery painted with Arabic verses. They would toss them back into the water, as if returning them to their keeper. The Tagus was patient. It swallowed history the way the sea swallows rivers, slowly, inevitably, without malice. As Lisbon grew, the river became its artery. Everything moved through it: food, wood, iron, faith. From the hills above, narrow stairways led down to the quays, where sailors shouted in half a dozen tongues. The smell of tar and salt filled the air. Ropes creaked, seagulls screamed, bells rang from ships that had no name. But even here, beneath the noise, the same silence remained. The silence of the water itself, deep and listening. To some, the Tagus was sacred. They said its current was guided by invisible spirits, the same ones that protected the city from storms. Fishermen whispered short prayers before launching their boats, asking permission to cross the tide. Women dropped flowers from the cliffs on holy days, letting them drift out to sea as offerings. And whenever a sailor didn't return, they said the river had called him home. The people built around this faith. The first warehouses rose beside the docks, their walls thick to keep the humidity out. Beside them, chapels appeared, small, simple, whitewashed, each dedicated to a saint who had once survived the sea. At night, the lamps from these chapels flickered on the water like a constellation. Turned upside down, travellers who arrived from distant lands wrote of a city that shimmered even in darkness, as if lit from below. They called it the City of Reflections. The river shaped more than the land. It shaped the spirit. Lisbon's patience, its melancholy, its quiet endurance, all came from watching the Tagus. The river taught the people to wait, for tide, for trade, for the return of those they loved. Waiting became a rhythm of life, a way to measure time when clocks were still a luxury. Even festivals were timed by the river. In summer, when the water dropped low, the banks became gathering places for music and food. In winter, when floods came, the people sealed their doors and prayed. The Tagus was their calendar, their teacher, their mirror. Sometimes it was cruel. Storms swept through the estuary, dragging ships from their moorings, smashing them against stone. There were mornings when the docks were littered with splintered masts, barrels and drowned birds. But even in destruction, the people found rhythm. They rebuilt, they blessed the water again, and they sang to it, songs that mixed joy and sorrow in equal measure. That sound rising over the tide would one day evolve into fado, the music of longing. But centuries before it had a name, the feeling was already there, carried on the wind that came up from the Tagus each evening. As the centuries turned, the world beyond Lisbon began to shift. New ships, larger and bolder, appeared on the horizon. Compass needles replaced the stars, sails grew taller, maps grew wider. The river that had once marked the edge of the world became the road to its centre. Lisbon, once content to watch, now began to move. The age of waiting ended. The age of departure began. From the 16th century onward, the Tagus was lined with masts. Caravels, galleons, and merchant vessels crowded its mouth like a forest of ghosts. They left for places the people of Lisbon could barely imagine. Guinea, India, Brazil, Japan. Each departure was both hope and mourning. The families would gather on the hills to watch the sails shrink into the horizon. Mothers held children against their chests, wives held rosaries, fathers hid tears behind tobacco smoke. They all knew that the sea gives and the sea takes, and that for every ship that left, one would not return. The river remembered them. In storms, debris would wash back to shore. A plank, a shoe, a letter sealed in wax. These fragments became relics. They were buried in churchyards, named in prayers, honoured as proof that the ocean could never erase everything. Even as Lisbon's wealth grew, gold from Brazil, spices from India, ivory from Africa, the river kept its solemn face. It carried the scent of empire, but also the weight of absence. The quays became busier. Palaces rose along the waterfront, built from the taxes of distant colonies. Warehouses overflowed with sugar, tobacco and silk. Bells from new churches rang above the sound of merchants and slaves. The city gleamed with prosperity, but the river saw the other side of it. The chained men unloading cargo, the cries from ships that crossed the Atlantic, not with goods but with souls. The Tagus carried both wealth and sorrow, reflecting neither judgment nor mercy, only truth. Even then it warned them. The tide began to shift unpredictably. Fishermen noticed changes in the current, small tremors in the water that made their boats shudder. Dogs barked at night, as if hearing something deep beneath. But the people, wrapped in gold and glory, no longer listened as they once had. They forgot that the river, like memory, can turn. On the morning of November 1st, 1755, when the earth shook and the sea withdrew, the Tagus revealed what it had hidden for centuries. The water pulled back so far that people could see the bones of old ships resting on the riverbed. Anchors rusted into coral. Amphorae cracked like eggshells. Children ran onto the exposed sand, marvelling at what had been uncovered. Moments later, the water returned, not as river, but as wall. It rose higher than any bell tower and swept through the city, carrying with it fire, timber, and the cries of thousands. For a brief moment, the Tagus took back everything it had ever given. When the wave receded, silence fell. The docks were gone. The palaces were rubble. The merchants' ledgers, the sailors' maps, the cathedrals, all reduced to mud and ash. But the river remained calm as before, flowing through ruins as if nothing had changed. It did not mourn, it did not celebrate, it simply remembered. In the years that followed, as the city rebuilt, the people began to treat the river differently. No longer a boundary, it became a reminder. They built new quays, stronger, higher, made of marble and granite. They erected statues to the explorers who had once sailed from its mouth. But beneath the celebration, there was always a quiet hesitation, as if they feared to awaken what slept below the surface. The priests blessed the waters more often. The fishermen whispered longer prayers. And sometimes, when the fog rolled in from the Atlantic, people swore they could still hear the bells of the drowned churches ringing beneath the tide. The Tagus never explained itself. It never needed to. It had been here before them and would remain after. It carried every version of Lisbon, Roman, Moorish, Christian, imperial, within its depths, layered like sediment, each era a faint reflection of the one before. The city changed, but the water did not. It flowed on, indifferent yet intimate, patient yet unforgetting. To walk beside it today is to walk beside time itself. The same light falls upon it, the same wind stirs its surface. The trams hum along the riverbanks, and the bridges cast their shadows where once only sails passed. But if you stand still long enough, if you close your eyes and listen, you can still hear the older city moving within it. The creak of ropes, the chant of sailors, the distant ring of bells beneath the water. The Tagus remembers everything. It remembers the first footstep that touched its shore, and the last hand that reached for help when the wave came. It remembers the prayers of the Moors, the songs of the Romans, the cries of the Christians. It remembers the gold that glittered too brightly and the silence that followed. It remembers the names carved on ships now lost to coral, and it remembers how, when all else fell, it remained steady, reflective, eternal. For Lisbon, the river is not past or present, it is both. It is the mirror that holds every version of the city in one reflection. And when the light of evening falls across it, soft and golden, it feels as though the Tagus is once again whispering to the hills, "I remember you. I have always remembered you." Beneath the brightness of Lisbon lies another city, silent, patient, hidden from the sun. It does not appear on any map. Its streets are made of tunnels, its squares of echo, its monuments of damp stone. To find it, one must descend, not through time alone, but through memory. For Lisbon is not built upon earth, but upon its own ghosts. Every generation has laid a new city atop the bones of the one before, pressing history deeper into the ground. What stands today above the light is mirrored below by shadow, arches beneath churches, cisterns beneath houses, and tunnels beneath the streets where footsteps fade into water. The oldest of these chambers belonged to the Romans. 2,000 years ago, they carved their galleries beneath what is now Baisha, shaping the rock into vaulted corridors and pillars that still hold firm. When first discovered, people thought they were catacombs. Later, archaeologists recognized them as part of a vast water system, an underground sanctuary of engineering created to capture, store and cool the lifeblood of the city. The Romans understood that in a place where light can burn, water is mercy. They built not for show, but for survival. The aqueducts fed fountains, the fountains fed baths, and beneath them all, the galleries whispered with the sound of dripping stone. A pulse that still beats in darkness. For centuries, these tunnels were forgotten, buried under layers of conquest and reconstruction. When the Moors came, they built upon the same veins. They widened the cisterns, added new wells and turned parts of the network into prayer chambers and cool sanctuaries for reflection. In the stillness of these underground halls, men recited verses from the Quran, their voices echoing softly off damp walls. To them, water was purity, a bridge between the seen and unseen, and Lisbon, with its hidden rivers and living rock, became a sacred vessel. When the city later fell to the Christian knights, the tunnels did not vanish, they simply changed language. Wells were blessed in the name of saints' shrines, replaced prayer niches. Statues of Mary stood where lamps of oil once burned, but the water still flowed. The stones did not care which god they served, they remembered only sound and touch. Down here, faith had no colour, only rhythm. Over the centuries, the surface city rose higher. Palaces grew, markets expanded, fires came and were rebuilt. Yet beneath the clamour, the underground world remained, breathing unseen. During earthquakes, it trembled but did not fall. During sieges, it offered shelter to those who knew its secret doors. In times of plague, the sick were hidden here, away from the eyes of the living. And when storms flooded the riverbanks, the tunnels filled and emptied like lungs, the city's silent respiration. Few ever saw this world. Most walked above it their entire lives, unaware that beneath their feet, arches older than memory held the ground together. Sometimes during construction, workers would strike a hollow sound, a stone that rang differently. They would dig deeper and find a corridor, a staircase, a black void descending. For a moment, sunlight would spill into a world that had not seen it for centuries. Then, as always, they sealed it again. In 1773, after the Great Earthquake, masons rebuilding the Baisha district uncovered a series of immense stone chambers. Water gleamed at the bottom like liquid glass. The air smelled of iron and moss. No one could say who built them or when. Some believed they were Roman, others said Moorish. The truth was both and neither. They were Lisbon itself, layered and inseparable. The workers were ordered to fill the chambers, but the water refused to vanish. It seeped through the stones, gathering again, as if reclaiming its ancient right. Eventually they sealed the entrances with iron gates and left them in peace. Centuries passed. The city above grew modern. Electric lights, trams, bridges, but below nothing changed. The underground city slept, its only company the slow drift of water and the rare footsteps of those who dared to enter. Archaeologists rediscovered it in the 20th century by accident, after heavy rain opened a crack in the street. When they descended, torches in hand, they found the air cool and still, the walls glistening with moisture. Roman inscriptions faintly marked the stones. The floor was covered in water, so clear that the reflections of the explorers looked like figures from another age. Today, these galleries open only once a year, for a few days, when the water level drops low enough to allow entry. Visitors walk single file through the tunnels, their footsteps rippling the surface. The air hums faintly with echoes, and every sound lingers longer than it should. It feels less like visiting ruins than entering a memory that is remembering you in return. Guides whisper, so as not to disturb the silence. Some claim that when you stop speaking, you can hear another sound, faint, rhythmic, like breathing, the city's heartbeat beneath your feet. The underground city is not only Roman. Across Lisbon, countless other chambers lie buried. Moorish cisterns in Alfama, medieval wells beneath convents, drainage tunnels below the old cathedral, escape passages under the castle. Some were built for water, others for war, a few no one can explain. Beneath the ruined Carmo convent, legends tell of secret passages leading to hidden treasures or relics moved after the earthquake. In Alfama, residents sometimes find stone steps under their homes, descending into nowhere. These stairways end in blocked arches, or in pools that shimmer with their own light. No one digs too far. The ground of Lisbon is unpredictable. Remove one stone, and the entire neighbourhood might sigh. To those who live here, the idea of a city beneath the city is no myth. It is an accepted truth, spoken quietly. The elders say that Lisbon never truly sleeps, because the water below never stops moving. When you hear creaks in old houses at night, that is not wood expanding. It is the breath of the tunnels. When fog rolls in from the river, it carries the scent of that hidden world. Damp, mineral, eternal. It is as if the city above and below are speaking to each other through the mist. During the great rebuilding of the 18th century, when the Marquis of Pombal ordered the creation of the modern Baisha grid, he faced a choice. Should the new city erase the old foundations or build upon them? He chose the latter. His architects laid rational, symmetrical streets above the ancient, irregular ones, sealing history beneath geometry. The result was stability, but also amnesia. Lisbon became more orderly, more European, but it lost a piece of its reflection. The underground world remained, but fewer people remembered it was there. Yet the past has a way of resurfacing. During the Second World War, as refugees and spies flooded neutral Lisbon, the tunnels found new purpose. Smugglers used them to move goods and information unseen. In some quarters, they became shelters during air raid drills. Though no bomb ever fell, The water still glistened, the walls still whispered. Down there, beneath blackouts and uncertainty, the same ancient calm held. Even now, modern engineers struggle with this hidden labyrinth. Every subway line, every foundation must be measured against the unknown. Beneath the asphalt lie empty spaces that maps cannot predict, some filled with air, some with water, some with silence so deep it hums in your bones. Builders say Lisbon is the hardest city in Europe to dig, not because of the rock, but because of what lies beneath it. Each excavation risks awakening a memory best left undisturbed. There are stories told among the maintenance workers, of tunnels that lead where they should not, of voices echoing where no one stands, of sudden gusts of cold air as if something ancient had just passed by. They are not fearful tales, only reminders. In Lisbon, the past is never gone. It simply waits below, listening. To stand above these hidden chambers is to realize how fragile the surface truly is. The sunlight, the tiles, the music, all of it rests upon the patience of shadow. Without the underground, the city would collapse. It is the unseen that holds the seen in place. Perhaps that is why Lisbon feels so grounded, even in ruin. It has roots of stone. The Romans once believed that places remember the actions of men, that every wall, every corridor absorbs the emotions of those who walked through it. If that is true, then the underground city of Lisbon is heavy with memory. It has absorbed the fear of earthquakes, the prayers of monks, the laughter of children, the footsteps of archaeologists who thought they were discovering something new, not realizing the city was discovering them. There is something humbling in that thought, that beneath every act of creation lies another, older one supporting it. The people of Lisbon may not think of it daily, but unconsciously they move in rhythm with it. The sound of fountains, the coolness of stone walls, the curves of streets following ancient aqueducts, all are echoes of what lies below. Sometimes, when the rain falls for many days, the drains overflow and the streets glisten with water that smells faintly of minerals. The locals call it the breath of the old city. It is the underground world reminding the surface that it still exists. And when the rain stops and the light returns, the streets dry but the scent lingers. Damp, metallic, and strangely comforting, Lisbon's beauty has always come from its contrasts. The open light above and the deep silence below. One cannot exist without the other. The tourists who walk the sunlit squares see only half the story. The real Lisbon, the ancient, enduring one, lives in darkness, in patience, in water. The city of light is built upon a city of shadow, and both are alive. To enter the underground is to understand the city's soul. It is to feel how centuries have shaped not only walls, but the rhythm of being itself. The tunnels breathe slowly, like the sea. The water hums softly, like a distant hymn. And somewhere between the two, the past continues, not dead, not forgotten, but simply waiting for those who remember how to listen. That is Lisbon's secret. It never truly rises. It never truly falls. It only shifts between light and dark, between memory and forgetting, between the city above and the city below. And in that delicate balance, it endures. It began like any other morning. The 1st of November, 1755, All Saints' Day. Bells were ringing from every church tower, calling the faithful to prayer. The air was calm, the sky bright, the Tagus quiet and glassy. Women lit candles inside chapels, men knelt in pews, and the smell of wax and incense, mingled with salt drifting from the sea. Lisbon, unaware, stood in perfect stillness, a city washed in light. No one knew that beneath their feet, the earth had already begun to move. At 9:40 a.m, the first tremor struck. It was gentle, almost curious, a vibration so light that people looked at each other, uncertain if it was real. Then came the sound, deep, resonant, rolling through the ground like thunder, trapped beneath stone. Walls shivered, candles trembled, birds rose in clouds from the rooftops. A moment later, the world broke open. The second wave came with violence. The churches, filled for morning mass, began to sway as if made of paper. Chandeliers fell, pews split apart, statues of saints crashed from their pedestals. Outside, cobblestones split into seams, fountains burst like veins, and towers leaned, twisted, and collapsed. People ran into the streets, only to find the streets cracking beneath them. The noise was unbearable. Not only the sound of stone breaking, but something deeper. The roar of the earth itself, a sound that seemed to come from every direction at once. Within minutes, the heart of Lisbon was gone. The great cathedral collapsed into dust. Monasteries crumbled. The royal palace by the river dissolved in smoke. The Baixa district, with its markets and warehouses, turned into a labyrinth of fire and ruin. Clouds of white lime and shattered tile darkened the morning into twilight. And through it all, the bells kept ringing, some torn from towers, swinging wildly, their iron tongues striking as they fell. Then, as suddenly as it began, the shaking stopped. Silence, heavy, absolute, unnatural. The survivors stumbled through the wreckage, calling names that no one answered. The smell of dust filled the lungs. People searched for open space, for safety, for anything that would not fall. They gathered along the riverbanks, believing the water to be their refuge. Mothers held children. Priests carried crosses. The faithful prayed, asking for mercy. From a sky that had turned the colour of ash, what they could not see was that the Tagus had changed. The water, drawn backward by some unseen force, had retreated into the sea. The riverbed lay exposed, glittering with shipwrecks, anchors and bones. Children ran forward, marvelling at the sight. Some shouted with wonder. For a moment it felt like a miracle, the sea itself parting. Then from the horizon, a wall appeared. It was not a wave, it was the ocean itself, risen into a single moving mountain of water. Witnesses would later say it glowed white in the sunlight, taller than the highest tower. It came without sound at first, then with a roar that devoured all others. The people on the shore had no time to run. The sea reached them before the echo of its own approach. The wave hit with the force of continents. Ships anchored in the harbour were hurled onto rooftops. Wooden beams became spears. Houses were peeled from their foundations like leaves from a tree. The royal square vanished in seconds. Fire followed water as oil lamps and candles ignited the debris, spreading flames through what the flood had spared. Within an hour, the city was an inferno. Some fled to the hills, but even there the ground shook. Aftershocks rolled through the afternoon, like afterbreaths of the catastrophe. From the castle above, survivors looked down upon a city unrecognizable, a sea of flame surrounded by real sea. The wind carried the smell of burning wood, salt and flesh. The sun disappeared behind the smoke. Night arrived early. Across Europe the tremors were felt, in Spain, in France, even as far as Finland. The world understood, perhaps for the first time, that nature itself could be more powerful than any empire. Voltaire would later write of it with horror. Philosophers would debate its meaning, but for the people of Lisbon, there was no philosophy, only silence. In a single morning, faith had turned to ash. When dawn came again, the light revealed what was left. The Baixa district was gone. The royal palace lay at the bottom of the river. Thousands of bodies floated among the ruins. The smell of smoke lingered for weeks, but through the devastation, something else began to stir. Not hope, Not yet, but endurance. Lisbon had been destroyed many times before. By fire, by invasion, by time. This was different, yet familiar. The city, like the people, had learned how to begin again. The Marquis of Pombal, the man who would lead the rebuilding, stood among the rubble and said calmly, "Now, we bury the dead and feed the living." His words became the first step toward rebirth. But before that rebirth could begin, Lisbon had to face its ghosts. The earthquake had not only shattered stone, it had opened the ground itself, revealing the layers of the city's buried past. Beneath the ruins, the Roman galleries survived almost untouched. Wells, tunnels and cisterns still held their water, as if nothing had happened. The underground world, silent witness to millennia, had endured what the surface could not. It was as though the earth had chosen what to destroy and what to preserve. In the weeks that followed, the survivors dug through the wreckage. They found not only bodies but history, Roman columns, Moorish tiles, forgotten cellars. Time had collapsed into a single layer, and in that strange equality of ruin, every civilization stood side by side once more. The earthquake had made Lisbon ancient again, and yet amid the destruction, there was a strange peace. The air cleared, the river resumed its slow rhythm, and the light, that eternal golden Lisbon light, returned, glinting off broken tiles and shattered glass, as if to remind the people that beauty, like memory, cannot be extinguished, only changed. The survivors began to speak of the event, not as punishment, but as revelation. They said the earth had spoken, not to destroy, but to awaken. It had reminded them that cities are fragile, that pride is temporary, that beneath everything built by human hands lies something older, stronger, and patient beyond comprehension. The earthquake stripped Lisbon of illusion. What remained was truth. In time, that truth would shape the modern city. Architects studied the ruins and designed buildings with flexible wooden frames, resistant to tremors. One of the earliest examples of seismic engineering, streets were laid out in perfect lines, rational, open, filled with light and air. The city that rose from the ashes was not a copy of the old, but something entirely new, disciplined, resilient, born from understanding rather than ignorance. It was as if the earth itself had become an architect, forcing humanity to learn its rhythm. But even as new walls rose, the memory of that morning remained. People still avoided lighting too many candles on All Saints' Day. They still told stories of the bells that rang from beneath the river when the tide was low. Some swore they could hear whispers from the ruins below, faint and patient, like a voice remembering itself. Perhaps it was the earth's voice, or perhaps it was Lisbon's, the voice of a city that refuses to die. For every stone destroyed was replaced, and every ruin became foundation. The people rebuilt not out of pride but necessity, an instinct older than empire. They learned to live with the possibility that everything could vanish again, and in doing so, they found a strange kind of calm. Today, when you walk through Baisha's ordered streets, you can still feel that calm beneath the geometry, the sunlight on the tiles, the wind through the arches, the echo of footsteps, all carry the quiet knowledge of fragility. Lisbon wears its beauty lightly, like a memory of loss. Sometimes when the ground trembles faintly, just a passing vibration from the subway or the shifting of the tide, locals pause just for a moment. It's not fear, it's recognition. The earth is speaking again softly this time, reminding them of what it once said so loudly. What it said was not destruction, it was balance, a reminder that nothing built upon this world can last forever, and that impermanence is not tragedy but truth. The city learned that lesson deeply. It learned to exist not in defiance of the earth, but in harmony with it. That is why Lisbon today feels both fragile and eternal. A city aware of its own mortality, and therefore more alive. The earthquake of 1755 was not merely an event, it was a transformation. It marked the end of an age of faith and the beginning of an age of reason. It tore down the old Lisbon, but in doing so, revealed the one that had always been there, the city of light and shadow, of water and silence, of endurance beyond comprehension. The earth spoke once and Lisbon listened. Now, centuries later, the memory remains not in books, but in the rhythm of daily life, in the steady hum of trams gliding down rebuilt streets, in the reflection of sunlight on tiled walls, in the scent of the sea drifting through open windows. The city moves slowly, thoughtfully, as if afraid to disturb the ground beneath it. Yet that same ground, the one that once destroyed, now holds it steady. Lisbon lives because it remembers. The earth spoke, and instead of resisting, the city became its echo. The morning after destruction always carries a strange quiet. In Lisbon, that quiet lasted for years. The smoke cleared, the ashes settled, but the silence remained. A vast stillness that spread from the river to the hills. For a time, it felt as though the city itself was listening, waiting for permission to breathe again. The old streets were gone, replaced by an open wound of stone and dust. The air smelled of lime and salt, of fire long extinguished but not forgotten. And then, slowly, hands began to move. The living emerged from the ruins. With shovels, with ropes, with faith that survival itself could be an act of prayer. The Marquis of Pombal, standing amid the wreckage, did not speak of glory or vengeance. He gave an order that would define a new age. Now we bury the dead and feed the living. Those words became law, rhythm, and prophecy. Lisbon's rebirth began not with architects, but with labourers, with those who had nothing left to lose. Before they could rebuild, they had to understand what was gone. The earthquake had erased almost every landmark, leaving the land unfamiliar even to those born upon it. Streets that once led home now ended in cliffs of rubble. The river had changed its shape, swallowing entire neighbourhoods and revealing ancient foundations. What had been royal palaces now lay at the bottom of the Tagus. The city's map had become a riddle. Pombal saw in this emptiness not despair but possibility. He gathered the brightest engineers, mathematicians, and architects of the realm and set them a task unprecedented in Europe: to rebuild a capital not upon memory but upon reason. The old Lisbon, chaotic and medieval, had been swept away. The new Lisbon would be born from geometry, clean, open, rational, modern. It would be a city designed to survive the earth itself. They began with the Baixa, the heart of the old city, where the destruction had been complete. Here, amid ashes and silence, Pombal envisioned order streets would no longer twist and tangle like vines. They would run straight and wide, allowing air and light to move freely. The plazas would be spacious, the buildings uniform, the foundations reinforced with lattices of wood designed to sway with the tremors rather than resist them. It was a revolution not of aesthetics but of philosophy, a city that accepted movement as part of its strength. The engineers built models and tested them in public. They filled boxes with sand, constructed miniature houses, and shook them violently to simulate the next earthquake. When the structures held, the people watching cheered. Lisbon had discovered a new kind of faith. Not in divine protection, but in knowledge. It was the birth of seismic science, born from the ruins of devotion. As the work began, thousands of workers flooded the valley. They cleared rubble, levelled the ground, and laid new foundations upon the buried ruins of the past. The rhythm of rebuilding filled the air. Hammers, Saws, voices shouting across scaffolds. The smell of dust was replaced by that of fresh-cut wood and lime mortar. Slowly, from the ashes, a grid began to emerge, an architecture of balance. Each building, though modest, mirrored the next. No one would be grander than the other. The city itself became a symbol of equality, of resilience shared. The new Baisha was designed not for kings, but for citizens. It was a bold idea that a city could be both beautiful and practical, both safe and alive. Every facade faced the light, every street open toward the river. From above, the plan resembled a compass pointing outward to the sea, as if Lisbon, even after ruin, still sought the horizon. But beneath this rational order, emotion lingered. The people who built these walls carried memories too heavy to name. Every hammer strike was both creation and remembrance. They built quickly, but they did not forget what had been lost. When they dug foundations, they found fragments of the old world, Roman columns, Moorish tiles, pieces of shattered altars. Some kept them as talismans. Others buried them again, whispering prayers that the earth would be kinder this time. Pombal's vision extended beyond architecture. He reformed the laws, reorganized trade, and revived education. He declared that the earthquake was not divine punishment, but natural cause. A statement radical for its time. Lisbon would not be ruled by fear, but by reason. This was the Enlightenment made stone. Each building, each street, each plaza was a lesson, a physical testament to human resilience, guided by understanding. Still, not all agreed. Many saw the new city as soulless, stripped of the charm that centuries had woven. They missed the twisting alleys, the scent of hidden courtyards, the intimacy of the old labyrinth. The Baixa's straight streets felt too precise, too foreign to the Lisbon they remembered. But perhaps that was the point. The old Lisbon had burned with faith. The new one would endure with knowledge. Between the two, a bridge was built, invisible but strong. For decades, rebuilding continued. New districts rose: Chiado, Rossio, Terreiro do Passo, each one blending Enlightenment order with Mediterranean warmth. The facades gleamed in pastel shades, blue, cream, gold, catching the sunlight that had once illuminated smoke. Churches were rebuilt, their bells cast anew, their tones deeper now, as if aware of what silence could mean. The city once again filled with sound, the echo of footsteps, the murmur of markets, the laughter of children chasing pigeons across the plazas. Life, patient and unpretending, had returned. And yet Lisbon never forgot the price of that rebirth. Beneath every square lies the memory of those who did not survive, thousands buried without name, their stories sealed in the ground. The people built their homes knowing that beneath their floors lay both the dead and the foundations that saved them. In this coexistence of loss and endurance, Lisbon found its truth, that survival is not the absence of tragedy, but its transformation into meaning. Over time, the city's new order began to blend with its old soul. The rational grids softened under centuries of human touch. Plants grew from balconies, tiles spread like living mosaics, music filled the corners where geometry ended and emotion began. The azulejos, reborn after the quake, told stories once more. Ships, saints and stars painted across walls like living memory. The city had learned how to speak again, softly, beautifully. Travellers arriving by sea now saw a different Lisbon. Brighter, wider, serene. The royal square, rebuilt and renamed Praça do Comércio, opened grandly to the river like an embrace where fire and flood had once met. Order now stood. Yet even this order was gentle. Lisbon did not rebuild in arrogance. Its new symmetry carried humility. a knowledge of fragility that made beauty more precious. At sunset, the light returned as it always had, turning the river to gold. The hills glowed again, but this time the glow came not from flame, but from survival. The sound of bells drifted once more through the air, not as warning, but as song. The people had learned that the earth could destroy, but it could also teach. And from that teaching, they drew a peace deeper than faith. Sometimes, after rain, when the streets glisten and the air smells of stone and salt, Lisbon looks almost unchanged from the day it rose anew. The reflections in the puddles resemble the ruins that once lay beneath, as if the past still watches from below, approving quietly. The underground galleries remain, their waters calm. The earth has kept its promise. It has not spoken again. Rebirth in Lisbon was never about triumph, it was about balance, about learning how to live with memory, how to carry loss without letting it define you. The city that stands today is not separate from the one that fell. It is built upon it, literally, spiritually, patiently. Every wall here is both scar and prayer. Every tile is both ornament and offering. Every shadow carries light within it. And so, when evening comes, and the lamps along Baixia flicker to life, the city glows softly, not with the arrogance of survival, but with the humility of understanding. Lisbon does not boast of its rebirth, it breathes it. The rhythm of its streets, the calm of its river, the steady whisper of its underground, all speak the same quiet truth. That endurance, when rooted in acceptance, becomes grace. Centuries have passed, and the city remains fragile, luminous, awake. It no longer fears the voice of the earth, it listens to it, and in that listening, Lisbon continues to live, reborn each day in light, in silence, and in the memory of everything it has survived. Long before the earthquake, long before the city rebuilt itself from reason, Lisbon had already ruled an empire made of wind and salt. From the mouth of the Tagus, the Portuguese ships once carried the reach of a small kingdom to the edges of the world. But even in its greatest triumphs, the seeds of silence were already sown. Empires, like tides, always return to where they began. The story of that empire began not with kings, but with the river. The same water that reflected the ruins centuries later once mirrored sails as white as the sky. The harbour that now holds quiet ferries once roared with drums and anchors, with the smell of tar and distant rain. Caravels stood like spines of silver, their ropes creaking in the wind, ready to leave everything familiar behind. The people of Lisbon learned to measure time by departures, not by years, but by the distance of sails. In the 15th century, when the rest of Europe still feared the edges of the map, Lisbon looked toward them. The city that had rebuilt itself from the Moors now turned to the sea as its new frontier princes and captains gathered in stone halls overlooking the river, tracing lines on parchment that stretched beyond imagination. To them, the ocean was not emptiness, but possibility. And when the first ships vanished beyond the horizon, Lisbon waited, as it always had, in patience and in hope. The discoveries began as whispers. News of islands to the south, gold along distant coasts, spices that perfumed the air with promise. Then the whispers became songs, and the songs became processions. Ships returned laden with pepper, cinnamon, ivory, and silk foreign tongues filled the docks. The city swelled with colour and noise, its narrow streets overflowing with traders and pilgrims. From every tower hung flags, red, white, and green, fluttering like prayers to the sea. The age of discovery had begun, and Lisbon stood at its heart. To walk through the city, then, was to feel the pulse of the world. Every door opened onto another continent. Warehouses overflowed with riches that no one had seen before. Jewels from India, sugar from Brazil, porcelain from China, gold from Guinea. Bells rang from 100 churches, thanking heaven for the fortunes that poured through the harbour. Priests blessed the ships as they left, sprinkling holy water on decks that would soon cross storms and jungles. And in the evenings, the taverns glowed with lamplight, filled with stories of serpents, islands, and gods that spoke in thunder. But for all its splendour, Lisbon was never a city of noise. Even in the height of its glory, it carried silence in its bones. The sailors who returned from the edge of the world carried with them a kind of stillness, the quiet of men who had seen too far. They had looked into the endlessness of the sea and understood its cost. Many of them, after stepping ashore, never spoke of what they had witnessed. They walked the streets like ghosts, haunted by horizons that refused to end. For every ship that returned, 2 were lost. The Tagus carried them all, the living and the missing alike. Families waited for years, watching the water as though it might one day bring their loved ones back. When it didn't, they lit candles in the windows that faced the river. On foggy nights, the lights of those candles could still be seen drifting across the water like souls searching for shore. The empire grew vast, too vast for the small kingdom that ruled it. From Lisbon's quays, fleets sailed to Africa, to India, to the Americas. The city became a crossroads of the world. Languages from every hemisphere echoed through its streets. Yet the greater the reach, the deeper the shadow it cast. The wealth that filled the palaces was built upon human suffering. The forced labour of colonies, the trade of bodies across oceans. The same river that reflected gold also carried chains. In time, even glory grew heavy. The city began to change. The air thickened with smoke from warehouses. The bells no longer rang for discovery, but for requiem. Lisbon, radiant and proud, began to feel the fatigue of its own success. Empires are living things. They grow, they hunger, they consume, and then they sleep. By the 17th century, the city's golden light had begun to dim. Other powers rose: the Dutch, the English, the Spanish. Trade shifted, wars drained the treasury, and the once bustling harbour began to quiet. The caravel, once the symbol of conquest, became a relic moored in still water. The palaces along the river stood like mirrors now, reflecting not movement, but memory. The music of empire faded into the slow rhythm of tides returning home. Yet even in decline, Lisbon remained luminous. The wealth of centuries had carved beauty into its face. The tiled facades shimmered under the sun. The churches gleamed with marble and gold. The cobbled alleys still smelled of salt and wine. The empire may have begun to vanish, but its reflection lingered in every surface, in the blue tiles that told stories of ships and saints, in the fountains that sang softly through the night. Travellers who came in that age often remarked upon Lisbon's paradox, a city both triumphant and melancholic, alive yet suspended between centuries. To some, it felt as if the city knew its own fate, that it had seen the full circle of power and was content to rest. The light that bathed its hills at sunset seemed not of this world, too soft, too forgiving, as though the sun itself pitied the beauty it would one day leave behind. Then, in 1755, the earth spoke and erased what remained of the old empire. The earthquake did not just destroy buildings, it buried centuries of ambition, the palaces of merchants, the archives of explorers, the cathedrals built from colonial gold, all reduced to dust and silence. The sea reclaimed the rest. It was as though the world had decided to wipe the slate clean, to return Lisbon to what it had been before empires, a city of light and listening. When the city was rebuilt, the age of exploration was already ending. The world no longer needed Lisbon's ships. The maps were full, the edges found, the empire continued for a time, in Brazil, in Africa, in India. But its heart had changed. The centre no longer beat with discovery, but with memory. The sailors' songs turned inward, their voices softer, more mournful. Out of that melancholy came fado, the music of longing, the echo of an empire dreaming of the sea that once carried its name. Listen to fado, and you hear more than sorrow. You hear distance, the sound of waves between what was and what remains. The city sings to itself, not of conquest but of return. That is the true legacy of Lisbon's empire. Not the territories it once ruled, but the capacity to remember, to turn history into song. Centuries later, when the colonies began to fade and independence rose from their ashes, Lisbon did not fight the tide. It watched quietly as pieces of itself drifted away. Angola, Mozambique, Goa, Brazil, each one carrying fragments of its language, its rhythm, its light. The empire dissolved, but the connection endured, invisible yet eternal, like a scent carried by wind. Today, if you walk along the Praça do Comércio at dawn, when the city is empty and the river calm, you can still feel the ghosts of that empire moving through the mist. The arches that once framed the departure of ships now frame nothing but horizon. The bronze statue of King Jose faces the sea, his horse frozen mid-stride, as if waiting for ships that will never return. Around him, pigeons gather where admirals once stood. The sound of footsteps on marble echoes like the creak of old masts. Lisbon remembers, but it does not mourn. It has learned that glory fades faster than light, that the true wealth of a city lies not in what it conquers, but in what it keeps alive. And what Lisbon kept, through fire, through quake, through silence, was its rhythm, the slow, patient rhythm of a city that understands impermanence. Every evening, the Tagus turns gold again, just as it did in the days of empire. The water reflects the city's colours, the sky's shifting moods, and for a brief moment time folds, the centuries blur. You can almost see the caravels again, their sails filling with the same wind that now brushes the cheeks of those who linger by the railing. You can almost hear the prayers, the shouts, the songs, but when you blink, they're gone. Only the river remains, whispering softly. Carrying it all toward the sea, empires fall. Memory endures, and in Lisbon, memory is a kind of light. Beneath every city lies a truth that the surface can never hold. For Lisbon, that truth is written in stone and silence. Long after empires vanished and palaces turned to dust, the underground remained. It waited, patient and dark, carrying the weight of centuries without complaint. Above it, trams rattle, tourists wander, music drifts through squares. Below it, the air is still, the same air that once filled Roman lungs, Moorish prayers, and the sighs of those who rebuilt the city from ruin. They call it the Galerius Romanus, the Roman galleries. But that name is only the first layer of a story, with no final layer. The tunnels were not built in pride, but in necessity. The Romans carved them to guide the city's hidden waters, to cool its stones, to breathe beneath its heat. But time reshaped their purpose. When the Moors arrived, the galleries became cisterns. When the Christians conquered, they became cellars. When earthquakes struck, they became tombs. And when the modern city rose above, they became memory, a living archive of what refuses to be forgotten. For most of the year, these tunnels are unreachable. The groundwater that flows through them keeps them flooded. A mirror world beneath the pavement, invisible but present. Then, once or twice a year, when the water recedes, the city opens its heart. The iron gates beneath Rua de Prata swing open, and a narrow stairway descends into shadow. People line up for hours to enter. They speak softly, as if approaching a cathedral. At the bottom, the air is cool and heavy. The only light comes from the lamps of the guides, their reflections trembling across the water that still pools along the floor. The walls glisten with moisture, and every sound, a breath, a drop, a footstep, echoes endlessly. The arches rise low, carved with precision, still bearing the marks of ancient tools. Some stones are etched with symbols no one can read. Others are smooth, worn down by centuries of water passing over them like time itself polishing memory. Visitors often say that down here you feel watched, not by ghosts, but by the place itself. As if the earth remembers who walks through it, the guides whisper stories of Roman engineers who built these passages with geometry so perfect that no modern architect could improve it, of Moorish families who hid treasures here during the siege of 1147, of workers after the earthquake who stumbled upon the tunnels and fled in fear, thinking they had found the gates of the underworld. The air carries more than moisture, it carries history. Each drop that falls from the ceiling has travelled through centuries, through layers of empire, war and rebirth. When it hits the water below, the sound is almost musical. Standing in that echo, one realises that Lisbon is not a city built above its past, but within it, the boundaries between what was and what is are thinner here than anywhere else. Sometimes, archaeologists find fragments of the old world caught in the mud, Roman pottery, Moorish lamps, coins blackened with time. Each object tells a story, yet none tells it completely. The tunnels themselves are the only complete narrative. They connect every era, every silence, every rebirth. They are the city's bloodstream, carrying the essence of what has survived: fire, flood and empire. Beyond the Roman galleries lie other networks, less known, less mapped. Some stretch toward the castle hill. Others run beneath Alfama, where the oldest houses lean against one another for balance. During renovations, workers sometimes break through walls to find hidden staircases leading downward. Steps worn smooth by centuries of forgotten feet. These staircases often end abruptly, sealed by stone or open into small chambers filled with water, as if the city itself had exhaled and closed its lungs around the past. In old records, there are mentions of tunnels beneath monasteries, connecting to wells and crypts. Some say the monks used them during times of plague to move the dead unseen. Others believe they were escape routes for nobility when the city was under siege. None of this can be proven, but in Lisbon, truth and legend breathe the same air. The past is not something to be measured here, it is something to be felt. There is one story, whispered among the older residents of Baixa, that says during the earthquake of 1755, a group of people survived by retreating into the underground. When the city above burned and the sea invaded, they waited in the darkness, drinking from the clear pools, listening to the tremors pass above their heads. When they finally emerged days later, they found a new world, the Lisbon of ashes. No one knows what became of them. Perhaps they were the first witnesses of the city's rebirth. To walk these tunnels today is to walk through Lisbon's subconscious. Every sound above, footsteps, church bells, even the hum of electric wires, reaches down here, distorted, distant, like memories calling from another life. The city speaks to itself through the echo. The water listens, and in that listening, a strange peace exists, as if the underground forgives everything the surface has forgotten. During the hot summers, the air above shimmers, but down here, it remains cool and eternal. The temperature never changes. The smell of damp stone, of earth and iron, of time itself hangs in the air. It is a place without present, where the past and the now coexist in one breath. When you reach the deepest chamber, you can look up and see small cracks of light filtering through the floor above, sunlight spilling through the seams of manhole covers, faint and golden. They look like constellations, reminders that even in darkness, Lisbon remains bound to the light. Some believe that the city's enduring calm, its ability to face earthquakes, fires and loss, comes from this underworld. The tunnels act as roots, grounding Lisbon in the deep stability of the earth. Without them, the city might crumble under its own history. But with them, it breathes. Each vault, each arch, each channel is a lung that exhales the heat of the surface and inhales the cool of the earth. Together, they form an invisible harmony, a slow, eternal rhythm beneath the chaos of life above. When rain falls, the connection becomes visible. The streets overflow and water rushes into the drains, carrying leaves, dust and the faint scent of salt. Somewhere below, that water joins the ancient channels, awakening the old city. You can hear it if you listen closely on quiet nights, a low, steady murmur beneath the pavement, the voice of Lisbon remembering itself. Over the centuries, these tunnels have survived untouched by wars and politics. Kings have fallen, dynasties faded, flags changed colours, but the underground remains. It owes allegiance to no one. Its loyalty is only to the earth and to the idea of endurance. Archaeologists may map it, historians may write of it, but they do not own it. The underground city belongs to time alone. Some locals say that when you are born in Lisbon, your heartbeat sinks unconsciously with the rhythm of these tunnels. Perhaps that is why the city moves slower than others, why its people walk with a certain calm, why its music carries both joy and melancholy. The pulse beneath their feet guides them, reminding them to endure, to breathe, to listen. It is easy to forget, in a world of light, that life depends on shadow. The tunnels of Lisbon are not prisons of darkness. They are sanctuaries of memory. They remind the city that what is buried is not lost, that what lies beneath sustains what stands above. The Romans may have carved them for water, but what they truly built was continuity, the promise that Lisbon would never truly die. When you finally climb back to the surface, blinking against the sudden sunlight, the city feels different. The air is warmer, louder, full of colour and motion, but beneath every step, you can feel the echo of what you just left. A quiet pulse, steady and calm. The trams glide, the bells ring, the river glitters, and somewhere far below, water drips against stone, keeping time. Lisbon's tunnels do not ask to be remembered, they simply are. They exist the way memory does, unseen, persistent, essential. Without them, the city would be only architecture. With them, it is history made alive. Perhaps that is the secret every civilization forgets, that the future can only stand when it rests upon what endures in silence. Lisbon never forgot its tunnels are not monuments to the past, but arteries of life. They breathe the same air as the first builders, the same air as those yet to come. And when night falls and the city quiets, when the streets empty and the lamps glow against the mist, you might hear it again, faint, rhythmic, endless, the sound of water moving through the veins of stone, the sound of memory itself. At dusk, Lisbon changes. The The sunlight that once poured down the hills turned soft, sliding across the tiles and domes as though reluctant to leave. The river glows again, not the sharp gold of noon, but a deeper, older shade, like the memory of fire reflected on water. From the Alfama balconies, you can hear faint music, somewhere between song and sigh, a melody that drifts without beginning or end. The city seems to exhale, the noise fades. What remains is rhythm, the quiet rhythm of endurance. To stand here at this hour is to feel all of Lisbon at once. The city above and the city below. The centuries layered like the notes of a slow, patient chord. The wind moves through narrow streets, touching walls that have seen everything. Empire, ruin, rebirth. The bells of São Vicente toll softly over rooftops, their echoes folding into the hum of the river down below. Unseen, the tunnels of memory answer in silence. Together, they create a harmony between light and darkness, the same song Lisbon has been singing for 1,000 years. The people of this city have learned that survival is not defiance, but conversation. They do not fight the wind or the sea or the trembling of the ground. They listen, they adapt, they build again, knowing that nothing built here lasts forever, except the will to continue. Perhaps that is why Lisbon feels alive. Even in its stillness, it has accepted impermanence as part of its beauty. At night, the lamplight turns the cobblestones to amber. The walls glow pale gold, and the air smells faintly of the ocean. In the windows, the blue tiles shimmer under the lamps, catching bits of moonlight like fragments of another world. Each tile tells a story, a saint, a ship, a city within a city. Together they form a mosaic of time itself, each piece a whisper of what has passed. The azulejos are more than decoration. They are language, the way Lisbon remembers without speaking, fire-destroyed parchment, floods erased ink, earthquakes buried stone. But the tiles remained. Their patterns survive even when the buildings crumble. To trace your hand along them is to touch the fingertips of those who lived centuries ago, who painted stories onto clay and sent them into the future. The past here is tactile, it lives in colour and touch. Walk through the Baixa at night and you can feel that living past. The geometry of the Enlightenment city still guides your steps. Straight streets, calm facades, the quiet confidence of rational design. But between those lines, emotion seeps through. A window left open, a curtain moving in the wind, a guitar playing somewhere unseen. The new city, built upon ruin, has softened with time, absorbing the pulse of the one beneath. Order has become warmth, reason has become rhythm. In the upper quarters, Bairro Alto, Graça, Alfama, the streets narrow again, curling like smoke. Here the past never left. The stairs climb endlessly, turning corners that reveal sudden bursts of view. A dome, a spire, the river flashing silver in the moonlight. Laundry sways on balconies. Cats move silently along ledges. The smell of grilled sardines mingles with jasmine and rain. It is a sensory memory, one that pulls the listener closer to the ground, back to the human scale of history. Empires crumble, small gestures endure. In the taverns, Fado begins. A singer stands beneath a single light, eyes closed, voice low. The guitar weaves behind her like a second breath. The song is neither joy nor sorrow, it is both. It carries the essence of Lisbon, a longing that is not for what was lost, but for the beauty of having lived it at all. The audience listens without moving. Outside, the city listens too. The sound travels down stairways and alleys, through the cracks of doors, into the tunnels beneath, down there. The echoes mingle with the dripping of water, as if the earth itself were humming along. Every note of fado is an act of remembrance. It turns pain into presence, memory into light. Perhaps that is why the music never truly ends here, because the city itself is singing, not loudly, but constantly. Through wind and river and stone, Lisbon's true orchestra is invisible. When dawn returns, the city brightens again. Trams climb the hills, their wheels squealing softly against the tracks. The scent of coffee and bread fills the air. Fishermen move quietly along the quays, mending nets, while gulls circle above. The water of the Tagus shines like glass. To an outsider, it may look like any other morning, but to Lisbon, every sunrise is a ceremony, a small act of gratitude for another day given. If you stand on the Miradouro da Senhora do Monte, the highest point of the city, you can see everything. The hills rising like waves, the rooftops layered in terracotta and shadow, the vast river opening toward the sea. From here, Lisbon looks eternal, a city sculpted from light itself. But if you stay long enough, you notice the movement beneath that stillness. Smoke from chimneys curling upward, the faint vibration of trams, the slow drifting of clouds, reflected on windows. Even in silence, the city breathes. Lisbon is often called the city of light, but its brilliance is not the sharpness of the sun, it is something softer, older, the kind of light that remembers darkness. After centuries of destruction, the city learned that true illumination comes not from escape, but from endurance. It shines because it has fallen and risen and fallen again. Its glow is not perfection, but forgiveness. That is why, when you walk alone through Lisbon at night, there is no fear in its shadows. The darkness feels alive, protective, as though the city itself were watching over you. The sound of your footsteps merges with those of countless others who walked these streets before. Sailors, monks, lovers, wanderers, all part of the same quiet procession through time. The stones remember them all. Every civilization leaves something behind. A monument, a ruin, a trace of language. Lisbon leaves light. It gathers upon the river, climbs the walls, and lingers in the air long after the sun has gone. It is a light that belongs not to day or night, but to memory itself. The Romans saw it reflected on marble. The Moors captured it in their gardens. The Christians prayed beneath it. The people who rebuilt the city after the quake shaped it into streets, and today it still flows. Through window glass, through water, through every human breath that rises from its hills. Perhaps that is why Lisbon feels both ancient and awake. It does not chase the past or flee the future. It simply exists, suspended between them, illuminated by both. Every sunset here is also a beginning. Every ruin is a foundation. Every silence is a song waiting to be heard. If you listen closely at night, truly listen, you will hear it. The faint hum beneath the world, the slow echo of water against stone, the sigh of wind over rooftops. It is the same sound that filled the tunnels, the same rhythm that guided the river, the same breath that rose from the earth the day it spoke. It is the sound of Lisbon itself, the city beneath the light, whispering that nothing is ever truly lost, only transformed. And when sleep finally comes, and your eyes close upon that golden horizon, you may find yourself there, walking its quiet streets, hearing the distant bells, feeling the ground breathe beneath your feet. The city will not call you by name. It does not need to. It knows everyone who has ever listened. Lisbon endures. Lisbon remembers, and beneath its light, time itself seems to rest. There are cities that dazzle and cities that endure. Lisbon is neither one nor the other. It is both. A city that glows not from brilliance, but from patience. It does not demand attention, it invites stillness. It waits as it always has, between the river and the hills, between ruin and rebirth, between light and the quiet that follows. If you have walked with it long enough, you will understand that Lisbon is not made of stone or light, but of rhythm. A rhythm older than empire, older than faith. It moves through everything, through the ringing of bells, through the shimmer of the river, through the air that smells faintly of salt and sun. It is the rhythm of endurance, of water and time learning how to share the same path. Every step you take here carries centuries. Beneath your feet lie the bones of Rome, the wells of the Moors, the foundations of the quake, the dreams of those who built again and again. Lisbon has fallen more than once, and yet it never calls its survival victory. It calls it continuity. The light here is not innocent. It has touched ruin too many times. But perhaps that is what gives it its beauty, the knowledge of impermanence. The city's glow is not a blaze, but a whisper, a reminder that everything fragile can still shine. The people who live here know this instinctively. They rise with the sun, they pause with the wind, they listen when the ground speaks. They have learned that peace is not the absence of change, but the acceptance of it. At night, when the lamps flicker along the river, the city exhales. The tide returns, the air cools, the noise fades into a low hum that feels almost like breathing. Somewhere beneath, the underground waters answer, slow, steady, eternal. The dialogue between above and below never ends. Lisbon lives in that conversation. The city above the light and the city beneath it. And perhaps that is what the earth was trying to say that morning long ago. Not a warning, not a curse, but a truth. That nothing built by human hands will last forever, but the spirit that rebuilds might. That what we lose, we do not lose entirely. It flows into the ground, into the water, into memory, waiting to rise again in a new form. Lisbon has become that truth made visible, a place where loss and light coexist without contradiction. It remembers without clinging, rebuilds without forgetting. It stands because it knows how to fall. It glows because it has known darkness. So if you ever stand here as the sun sinks into the Atlantic and the city begins to blur into gold and shadow, listen closely. You may hear it, the slow echo of water under stone, the wind brushing past the tiles, the faint song rising from a hidden street. It is the same sound that has always been here, the heartbeat of a city that refuses to end. Let it fade, let it linger. The story is finished, but the sound continues, soft, endless, patient, like the breath beneath the city. Lisbon endures, Lisbon remembers, and beneath its light, the night finally rests. Thank you for listening. I wish you a peaceful, restful night, and I look forward to seeing you again on our next journey through history.